May 20th. We finally got some rain after 2 weeks of pretty much dry weather. And I am finally starting to see quite a bit of buds on my ranunculus. So this is my second year growing ranunculus. I wanted to give you all an update because it's very different than my first year growing ranunculus, where I only grew 1 crate's worth because I was moving to this property. So now that I actually seriously grew ranunculus outside in quantity, there are a few more things that I learned. So just to give you guys a bit of a summary, if you haven't been following me, I am growing in zone 6B in New Jersey. So in my zone, ranunculus technically don't overwinter very well. You can try. Now, I had tried to overwinter this season in the vegetable beds in the back. It's kind of hard to see over here, but I had to transplant them and move them because we undertook an unexpected septic project in March. And the irony is that later on, we didn't even need to regrade that area. So I could have basically left them in, but it was an 80% chance that they were going to need to move them. So it was like, let me move my ranunculus. Anyway, so those ranunculus, I'll show you how they're doing. They didn't do very well. And I think a part of it was just a transplant shock. I did move them in March when it was still kind of cold outside. So anyway, I pre-sprouted a bunch more in late January and then some more in February. So that's what I want to focus this video on, as well as just learnings in general. So let me show you what this patch looked like in early May. You can see up here, here's some footage, and it really wasn't, I mean, they were fine. There's foliage, but there wasn't really any buds. So let me show you what they look like right now. All right, so here are all the ranunculus that I started in late January. You can definitely see they are throwing up buds over here. So this is going to be a nice sized one. And I would say that these really started throwing up buds about a week ago. And as I'm walking, I bought like a few different colors. And somehow most of them ended up being white, which is fine because white is actually a lot easier for me to pair, especially with the Sweet William over there, where there's a lot more darker, richer colors. So what's really helped is the shade cloth, because what's happening is at night, we are still staying in the 40s, but during the day, it's getting up to high 60s, mid 70s, and that shade cloth is definitely helping keep that soil temperature cool. Now, here are some ranunculus in crates. I planted these in crates because I wanted some as insurance in case if it got really, really hot. Crates are portable, so I can move them to different places. In fact, I moved these crates over here so they could be under the shade cloth. These were started in mid-February, so most of these don't have buds yet. A couple of them have buds like this one over here. So the downside with crates is that obviously, you know, there's holes on the side, so you have to water them more often. The soil temperature is going to fluctuate a bit more, but these were started in mid-February. They spent a little bit more time indoors, and you can see that they're actually, from a foliage perspective, a lot healthier looking than the ones in the ground over here. So my experience is such that I'm seeing buds about 100 days after they go basically into the ground, not 90 days. So oftentimes I think we try to, you know, think about 3 months. It's a little bit more than 3 months. It's like 3.5 months for me before I start seeing buds. Hey guys, it's 2 days later and we have flowers. Let me show you what these ranunculus look like. Here they are. Super fluffy layers. So somehow I ended up transplanting a lot of the whites in the succession. This is what happens when you don't label, of course, but it does make it easier for me to sell these at my florist market because we typically like to bunch by color. So the stem length on these is pretty good. You know, this is probably about like a good 16 inches. This one's probably a little bit shorter here. So there's more coming up, which is really, really nice. I'm hoping to bring some to my market on Wednesday. Today is Monday. Now, again, the temperatures have been relatively cool at night. We're talking about mid-40s, and during the day, they're getting up to the 70s. And with the shade cloth, hypothetically, it's supposed to get the soil to stay around 65 degrees, if not a little bit lower. We did get not a lot of rain, but we got some rain the other day, so it's helping keep the soil cool. And what that means is that I think these will have at least a full week to continue blooming, and I'll get some cuts out of them, especially for some bouquets later this week, and hopefully I can save some for my CSA customers the following Friday. So it's May 23rd today. I'm here just doing my daily check, cutting some stuff for my market tomorrow. And I wanted to show you an observation that I've had, and I'd love to know in the comments if my hypothesis is correct. So we've got quite a bit of the white blooming, as I said yesterday. The ones that I've harvested for the market are really pretty. They are not open in the center, which gives it a higher value, especially with florists. Now, if you compare that with this one over here, clearly you've got the open center, and for a different variety, the open center is darker. So for retail bouquets, it doesn't matter, but for florists, you don't want to sell them these. These are kind of more just the traditional buttercups, but they're the same variety. They're the same corm, for lack of better. But one thing that I've observed is that you can see over here, these leaves are definitely starting to yellow, which is a sign of the ranunculus starting to go into dormancy because it's getting too warm, versus the ones that I'm cutting over here for those whites. They are doing a lot better in terms of the foliage, and that's because I am getting the shade cloth covered with these. The shade cloth is not long enough to stretch out over there. So I had prioritized covering down there because it was just overall healthier, smaller plants. So that got sacrificed. And what I'm seeing is that the bud quality is just not there, especially when it comes to that tight closed center, even the amount of layers, and the stem length is actually looking okay despite the amount of sun that this is getting. But yeah, let me know in the comments if that hypothesis is in line with what you guys have experienced or any research that you've come across. Everyone, it's May 25th, so another day, another video. I've been harvesting some ranunculus among other flowers to make some red, white, and blue jars for Memorial Day weekend. Now, one thing I've been very vigilant about is looking for pests, especially thrips in my ranunculus. So thrips are these tiny, tiny little black, brown bugs that crawl all around. Once you get a thrip infestation, it's really hard to get rid of them on your flowers, and the thrip pressure, at least where I am in the local areas, is really, really bad. So one thing that I have noticed, however, is if you look closely on the back over here, whoops, where is it? Let me focus in. You can actually see some aphids. I'm trying to get a better shot for you guys, but you can see a little dot on the back here. Let me put it down over here. And aphids, luckily, are a lot easier to manage and remove. So just a tip and reminder to make sure you look on the bottom or the back of the petals to make sure that you are removing any aphids before you sell them to customers. And so you could do it with your fingers. If it's too much in the cracks, you can use some tape. But yeah, these are a lot easier to remove, luckily. Hey guys, today is Saturday, May 27th, the last video that I'm going to do of this, because I think that we just have a few more days left before the heat takes on. I've been harvesting about 8 to 12 ranunculus each day. It's not a lot of ranunculus for the amount that I planted. So let me just show you what they look like right now and some very quick key takeaways. So now we finally have some more colors popping. The pinks are coming in, the pacotes are coming in, the ones in the crates are also starting to come in. And what's really great about the ones in the crates especially is that the stem lengths are phenomenal. Now this one had a bit of a wonky stem because of this hoop. I caught it a bit too late. It was just the shade cloth was kind of hitting on it. But as you can see, there are ranunculus blooming. The main issue is that as it gets really hot during the days, the pest pressure has definitely increased. So luckily only a couple of buds with thrips, but there's a lot more aphids. So I think I'm gonna be at most getting these till mid next week. And then afterwards at night, we start hitting the mid 50s, and the days are going to be high 80s, low 90s. And even if these bud, I think that the pest pressure is going to be incredible. And I think that I'm going to see a lot more thrips. Now, one thing I am experimenting with is actually overwintering these ranunculus. So I am not going to be pulling up these corms. I am just going to let them sit here and see how they do over the winter. I will be mulching this heavily, but in order to keep this bed in production, quote unquote, I had interplanted straw flower here. So all of this straw flower is actually looking like it's doing pretty well. This is a weed over here. Sometimes these weeds kind of look like snapdragons. But yeah, so this is straw flower, this is straw flower, that's straw flower. And so the straw flower was definitely a lot smaller, and they have done pretty well in this shade cloth. I think that the shade cloth is helping protect the moisture from evaporating in this soil. So I've got a bunch of straw flower littered all over. There's probably about 100 straw flower in this bed. Interplanting is probably not the right word for this. Interplanting is technically used when you're planting two crops next to each other with the intention of trying to maximize the yield on both of them. And so obviously they're not coming to bloom at the same time. This is kind of more like relay cropping, I guess. But taking aside the technicalities, the reason why I chose straw flower is because straw flower does have very, very deep roots. From what I understand, the corms, even though they have roots, the corm is still staying relatively shallow relative to the deeper roots that the straw flower is going to have. So anytime you plant two different types of varieties next to each other, you want to make sure that they have different root systems depending on what objectives you're trying to achieve. And I also want to make sure that the straw flower could have a bit of a canopy over the ranunculus corms, because ideally I want this bed to be a little bit more dry if possible. So if we have a heavy rain, I know the straw flower is going to be able to take up a lot of that water, but then also that canopy of leaves will hopefully also help prevent this bed from getting a little bit too wet versus, if I just kind of left them out without any type of crop in between. So a bit more about the shade cloth. I said before this is 40%. You could find it in like 30%, 50%, 60%. This is one that I got off of Amazon. But more importantly, I want to talk about using the shade cloth, because even though ranunculus like cooler weather, they still love full sun. So in the mornings like this right now, it's actually about 55 degrees. I keep the shade cloth off. In fact, at night I take it off. I leave it off for a couple of hours in the morning so they get some sun, and then I put it back on probably around 10 a.m. when the heat really starts picking up. And so far I feel like that has worked. So you can see that some of these flowers really do have a bunch of buds shooting up. Some of them don't have any, and it's just foliage. And so I am still trying to figure out how to grow ranunculus. When I say still, this is year 2, technically year 1 of growing like this. So I am going to attempt again, but I'm going to go inside and wrap up with some final thoughts. I am back inside and ready to share some key takeaways, learnings, and show you what they look like in small arrangements. So let's backtrack. I bought corms from a wholesaler named b.a.r.e. Now, b.a.r.e. sells Aviv variety type of ranunculus corms. So Aviv is bred for cut flowers, but Aviv is not considered like an Italian, a romance, a butterfly type of ranunculus. It is a relatively cheaper corm. And I purchased cheaper corms for a reason, because I know that ranunculus are very tricky. I'm not gonna go pay like $3 or $5 a corm to chance something like that out there. If you're buying something like an Italian ranunculus, that's what you're doing. And because those are bred ranunculus with patented rights, you have to rip those up. So I wouldn't have the ability to overwinter the the corms or the ranunculus out there like I am doing right now if I had bought those more expensive varieties. So takeaway number one is if you're a beginner, you don't live in a climate like the Mediterranean, I would highly recommend you not splurging on those fancy corms and just buying a typical ranunculus and finding the cheapest type of corms you can get. Now, oftentimes, if you go online to like the clearance section during like November, December, Holland Bulbs or DutchGrown.com, you'll find really cheap ranunculus corms, and honestly, those are fine. So those are a good place to go to, especially later in the year, earlier in the year, because that's when we're about to start our ranunculus. You don't have to hold them. That being said, holding ranunculus is actually not very hard in terms of storing them. I just store them in a closet, basically, at my room temperature, which tends to be a little bit lower in the winter, like around 65 degrees, and they're totally fine. So the second thing is that if you are going to chance it like me and planting them out, if you live in a zone that's like zone 6, zone 7, try to overwinter them, because I really only got like a week and a half blooms out of these. I did try overwintering. It was just, some logistical challenges with our septic stuff, but I'm going to attempt ranunculus again next year. I'm going to do it outside in that low tunnel. I'm going to cover it and I'm going to see what happens. But ideally, these should start blooming for you, especially where I am in New Jersey. If you're growing them under a structure, people are getting them in late March, definitely in April, and then their second flush is coming in May. So ranunculus, I have found, really do like to be babied inside, meaning you really should get that foliage as lush as possible before you put them out. Again, mine were evicted a little bit earlier because I was due to give birth. I wasn't sure when I would be at the hospital. I wasn't sure how long, so I figured better in the ground with moisture and some cover than in my basement potentially drying out. So that's number 2. Number 3, if you have short stems, because of how lush they look, they pair really well with Sweet William, which happens to be another bloom that is coming in right now. So let me show you. These are little posy bunches, I'm calling them. And they're bunches that I'm giving to my CSA customers in addition to their normal bouquet. But look at these. I mean, they look so gorgeous, especially with the Sweet William colors. Here's another one. So it looks awesome. And when you pair just 3 together, it looks like a luxe bouquet. I mean, this almost looks like, it could belong on a center piece on a table. So, for retail, I'm okay selling it with a bit of that open head, but obviously you're looking for ruffles like this. And, when you look at a ranunculus flower like this, you can't tell that this is a lower, not even like a lower quality. The corms are really high quality. It's a different cultivar, right? So it's not Italian. It's not romance, but it still looks really good, and none of your customers, assuming you're selling retail, are going to know. And that brings me to my last takeaway, which was I observed at my co-op how ranunculus did. Ranunculus did really, really well during the month of late April and May, especially during Mother's Day. But last week, we actually had quite a few ranunculus just sitting there. A lot of the other early spring stuff did better, especially stuff that people haven't really thought too much about in terms of planting annuals. A lot of them were more like perennial plants. And I think it's because wedding season is picking up. For whatever reason, people aren't using a lot of ranunculus in the weddings here, at least where I am from what I observed. So I learned that florists also don't really know too much about the varieties. And this is kind of one of those ahas that us flower farmers start realizing, which is that florists work with flowers, but it doesn't necessarily mean they know the varieties, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually know how things are grown. So oftentimes where they're educating florists around, this is how you maximize vase life, this will get you to the weekend. If you do this, you'll get a few more days out of it, put some flower food, that kind of stuff. So a lot of them just shop for what is pretty. And I can guarantee you that this makes pretty. So unless if you have a really, really knowledgeable florist who is looking for a specific type of ranunculus, I actually think if you can grow something like an Aviv well with long stems, then you can actually have a better margin. because these corms were about like 20 something cents versus paying upwards of $1 or more for, you know, the more popular varieties. Now, I do know that certain types do better. So for example, I think Lindsay from Muddy Acres really likes Amadine, Tecolote, right? So there might be certain types that work better in your climate, in your soil. That's for you to figure out. But so far, I'm pretty happy with the Aviv and its potential. So high level takeaways. If you live in a zone where you get cold winters and then all of a sudden it feels like it's summer, like most of us, invest in shade cloth, invest in frost cloth. They are not the same thing. Shade cloth, as you can see, is black. It has more of like the holes in there. It's a little bit more robust of a material. It is really meant to shade out the sun. This is why people put them over hoop houses. And I really do believe that the shade cloth bought me an extra probably 3 weeks. These would have been toast for sure. They're gonna take me through the next few days, and then I think that's about it. But at least I got something out of these. Next year, I'm going to try again. I love to hear in the comments below how you grew ranunculus, especially if you don't have a structure. So when I say structure, I mean like a bigger hoop house. Caterpillar tunnels to me are a part of another category, but I love to hear your experiences, what zone you're growing in, when you pre-sprouted them, when you put them out, if you successfully overwinter them in a zone like mine in 6. So hopefully this video was helpful for you, and I will see you in the next video.